I'm joined today by William Buhlman, author of 4 books on the out-of-body experience: Secret of the Soul, Destination Higher Self, Adventures in the Afterlife, and Adventures Beyond the Body. I feel like there's tremendous demand for this stuff right now, not just from our community and the kind of TMI community, but really from the zeitgeist at large. If you look at kind of this new Doctor Strange movie, astral projection is a topic in it. There are various TV shows now that cover the subject. It seems like this stuff's really starting to go mainstream. Do you think it's possible that we're kind of reaching a point where these concepts are no longer so esoteric? Do you see anything in terms of the people that come to your workshops, or what you come across in your travels that might indicate that we're reaching some kind of a critical mass here?
Well, there's definitely a huge increase in interest, and I think partially, especially in the last few months, I think the Doctor Strange movie has definitely had an impact on the group consciousness. Let's face it, modern society is very visual. More of them are going to watch that movie than will ever read a book on the topic, unfortunately.
Right.
And I was fortunate to have one of the books that are go-to books that have been out there for 20 years. And the subject matter is definitely, right now, it's exploding. I think it's because people want to know answers. People are tired of the belief systems. People want to have a way to obtain the answers for themselves without all this, let's just say, belief systems, all this, what now people call it fake news. There's a lot of, let's just say, misinformation out there about not only astral projection and out-of-body experiences, but all metaphysical topics,
right.
Altered states of consciousness. There's a tremendous amount of misinformation. And what I try to do in my books and my workshops is to explain it in a down-to-earth manner,
right.
that people can relate to and really use effectively in their explorations. Because the answers lie individually for us to become effective explorers of consciousness. It's not in the external world. The belief systems, the religions are not going to give us the answers, the big answers to who we are, where we come from, where we're going, and what our purpose is. That answer has to be found ourselves through our own inner explorations. And the more effective we become, the better information that's available, the better guidance, tools, and training that's available, the better people can obtain those answers for themselves. And that's what it's all about right now.
Right. And so to the extent that, say, pop culture sensationalizes the out-of-body experience, do you think overall that helps the sincere, personal quest for self-knowledge and discovery and exploration of consciousness, or do you think it impedes it somewhat?
Well, I think to some degree it's both. I think it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
I think, and I watched the movie, for instance. I watched it with my son, and it was, of course, sensationalized. Right. It wasn't at all realistic in many ways. But on the flip side, it got people to know that, hey, this could be real. This is interesting. This is exciting. That's what got people, I think, aroused would be the word about, and I got to know more about this subject matter because it is real.
Yeah.
Now, it's Hollywood typically sensationalizes everything, as we know, and they sensationalize this, especially his out-of-body experiences. Were sensationalized. But that's typical of what Hollywood does in all subject matter. But I think on the flip side, it really has gotten the interest level there, that people are willing to pick up a book now and say, hey, I got to study this and see there's something behind this. Because the out-of-body exploration, or what is some people call astral projection, has been around for thousands of years. The Bible talks about it. I mean, it has been out there forever. The Buddhists talk about it. The Dalai Lama mentions it. On my website, I have a quote about the Dalai Lama stating about OBEs. This is part of many religious cultures. They just have their own way of speaking about it. So it's about time, I think. It's past due that we get some, let's just say, focus on this area that's so important to the exploration and evolution of consciousness.
Right. And so, I have, some of my own workshops, and, I find that there is tremendous demand for this stuff. Maybe in some sense too much demand. So people come and all they want to do is get out of body or, astral project. And, they might, put on the headphones and have a really profound experience, but man, I did not get out of body. So what do you say to people like that?
Well, number one, the term out of body is kind of a misnomer. There's no evidence per se that we're in our bodies at all. Now we have to start from stage one here. We have to realize that consciousness is a continuum. That's how I look at it. That's how I teach it in my workshops, that there's various states of consciousness that we enter. And because we are multidimensional beings and that our consciousness is also multidimensional, we have the ability to enter into other states and not necessarily feel separation from the body. So the idea of the classic out-of-body experience is actually very limiting. It's a much broader topic than that. The concept of I can feel myself separating, I feel vibrations, I feel myself rolling or stepping away from my body. Many people never experience that.
Right.
I haven't in the last 10 years.
That's very interesting.
I started out when I wrote Adventures Beyond the Body 21 years ago. My first experiences were very physical-like and grounding experiences where I felt myself separating. But as I progressed over, 40 years of doing this,
right.
I find myself just someplace.
Right.
I'm suddenly there. I mean, and it's hard to describe that to people because you have to control. There's issues involved. Some people call it instant projection, or some people call it phasing.
Yeah.
There's or shifting. There's a lot of different terms out there. The key is to learn how to focus your consciousness in whatever state you're in.
Right.
That's the key to effective exploration of consciousness. And that's what I try to teach, not to be fixated on these physical-like sensations.
Right.
Because that just will inhibit you. There's so many different states that we can enter, countless states of consciousness. But the key is to control them through your own focus, which I developed tools, many, many years ago, and I write about them, like Awareness Now. You bring your awareness, you next level now if you need to change your focus. There's tools, there's affirmations, there's focus things that you can do to control and get the most out of each of your experiences, and that's what's most important.
Well, it's very interesting to hear you say that because my experience has been similar. Experiencing the vibrational state and having that visceral feeling of leaving my body has become rarer for me over time. And I think lots of people kind of share that experience. But some people, I think, slip into a sense of despondency over it, and, thinking that, oh, it's not happening for me anymore.
Yeah.
And they'll spend all this time trying to do a technique to kind of capture that feeling.
Yes.
And my point to them is always, you can do tremendous work, like work with a big W, on yourself just by, having an experience and putting your consciousness somewhere. And being so focused on kind of the moment of exit, doesn't always serve you well.
Yeah, we have to be aware of all times that there's many ways that we can have these experiences. And unfortunately, people have focused on the one way.
Right.
And that is this, I have to experience, and I deal with this in my workshops day one now, and I spend quite a bit of time on it. You don't have to have the vibrational state. You do not have to feel any exit. None of those things are necessary. In fact, for many people, they're quite limiting.
Right.
Again, that's a double-edged sword because the vibrational state for some people is scary.
Yeah.
So it's actually better for most people not to go through that, what is unfortunately now the traditional out-of-body experience. And just allow yourself to let go and be. And that's a much more effective, I find, approach. And that's what I've been teaching here at Monroe at the Institute now for 6 years. The ability for people to just let go. Don't think about your body. There's still certain basics, like never think about your body. Don't dwell on anything related to your body, because that'll bring you back.
Right.
There's still, you need to know the basics.
Right.
But it's all about focusing your state of consciousness and maintaining that state and making that state as real. Because reality is relative to the perceptions of the individual.
Right.
And if you have the majority of your state of consciousness in any locale, that is the only reality that is good for you, that's real for you.
Right.
And that's what's important here. So you accentuate that,
Right.
that new locale, wherever it may be, whether it's a physical-like environment or you could be in a void. You could be anywhere in the universe, really. But don't take it for granted that it's not real, just because it's different. One of the problems that I've found is that humanity is still so fixated on three-dimensional matter that they consider reality, the baseline of reality, to be 3D matter, where the opposite is actually true, I have found. Matter is just a thin epidermis of the universe. And as we move inward into these other states, we move beyond that 3D world that's what we consider solid. And we soon realize that the physical world is a tiny fraction of the continuum that exists. There's countless millions of realities.
Right.
And that we decide what's real for us.
Right.
Don't let someone else determine, and certainly don't base everything on matter being the center point, because matter is not. It's matter of fact, let's face it, when we exit the body at death, this is no longer going to be real to us. We'll enter another reality. Only the reality that we are within and conscious and focused upon is real.
Right.
And we have to remember that.
And so that point about the fear of death, to me, is the greatest benefit to the classical out-of-body experience, because you have the sense that you're physically leaving your body and, wow, you still exist. Like, I'm actually going to survive this whole death thing. And so for people that have not had that experience yet and are maybe trying these techniques, you've compiled lots of data, right, from surveys that you've received over the years from people that you've solicited questions about the OBE experience from. What do you think is kind of a typical success rate for someone that is practicing diligently and doing a technique every day? How often do you get out?
There's a wide spectrum of that depending on the person, and a lot of it has to do with their fear barrier.
Yeah.
I found that everybody has their own personal fear barrier. There's two issues that limits people in general, and this goes for all explorations of consciousness, not just OBEs. It could be shamanic methods, it could be hypnosis, it could be whatever. It's their fear barrier and their obsession with their physical identity. As long as you are totally indoctrinated that this biological machine is you, it's going to be difficult, because it's like an anchor. Each individual creates their own anchors in the exploration of consciousness, which of course OBEs is part of that. And that is one of the big ones that's seldom discussed. You have to train yourself in a way to let go of this being me. I talk about this in some of my talks, that when I prolong my out-of-body experiences, my humanoid form dissolves away.
Right.
I become a point of consciousness.
Right.
With 360-degree vision.
Right.
That's what we are.
Right.
That's what but people don't, it's hard to relate to that. I understand that.
Right.
It's hard to perceive yourself in that way if you haven't experienced it.
Right.
So that is one of the issues that inhibit people in their explorations. So you have to train yourself to get over that and begin to open yourself to a wider vision of who you are.
Right.
Next, of course, is the fear barrier, which people have this, they think they're dying. They equate out-of-body experiences with death.
I've been there, yeah.
Yeah, and I can see how that's an issue.
Yeah.
It's even part of the 7 stages of a near-death experience, OBE is part of it. So people think they connect those two. But yet we know from decades and decades of experience that we can exist beyond the body without, without our physical bodies at all, and do it effectively and for prolonged periods of time. Now, as far as percentages, everyone is really different in that regard. With dedicated action, it took me, 40 years ago, it took me 24 days. I write about it. I don't sugarcoat it. It takes dedication. It took me 24 days of daily activity, daily technique. I did the target technique for 20, and then I had my first OBE, which was mind-blowing, opened up a whole new world. But if I would have stopped at day 23, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Right. I mean, I'm not saying that this is for everybody, and that this, because it's like, just like yoga, just like any practice, it takes daily practice. Some people respond within a week. Some people respond within a couple days. Some people, it takes them months. It's all about self-conditioning to get over your own barriers that we have within ourselves so that we can truly explore our multidimensional self.
Right. And so it seems like the typical experience, certainly early on, is, the out-of-body experience kind of starts in sort of, what you term the astral, which I guess is like the next less dense sort of vibrational level beneath the physical. But some folks like me, for instance, my experiences early on were like going through some type of a wormhole or a vortex, and I'm in some place totally different, non-physical. And I actually had to work hard to get back, stupid me, I'm working hard to get back into the astral. Is that a typical experience, do you think? Have you encountered that much?
Yes. People have, everybody's different in that regard. But yes, some people cannot handle a non-3D environment unless, that takes some getting used to. Many people. If you're immediately thrust into a non-3D world, what is there to relate to? Yeah. And if people freak out and they end up thinking about their body. The first thing people do when they want stability, they want the comfortable surroundings of form. They want a floor. They want a ceiling. Yeah. They want something that they can relate to. Reality is not always like that. You have to. That's one of the things that's important to pick up a book and read about this subject, because the majority I have found from my explorations, the vast majority of reality, non-physical reality, is not 3D at all. It's not structured or form-based. It's mostly voids. It's mostly, or semi-voids, or voids that are starting to become form-based. So we have to, there's different rules, for instance, there's different kinds of realities that we experience. I write about consensus realities, non-consensus, and voids, because they're the three most commonly we experience. And you have to be aware that they're all real. They're just different. Our perception of them is going to be different, and the rules that occupy each of these kinds of realities, how we function within them, is going to be different. So we can't use our physical. In other words, there's different rules of the road depending on the kind of reality you're in. We have to remember that everything is thought. Everything is ruled by thought. It's not, stability is created by your own focus and your own way that you manage your thoughts. And that's what needs to be learned. And it takes a little while. When you're in the experiences, you learn very quickly that you have to stay centered, you have to stay calm, you have to be very neutral in what you're projecting. In other words, every thought is a creative projection. And when you're in a non-consensus reality, which is one that can be shaped and formed by you, you're the creative force. So you have to be totally 100% responsible for every thought that you manifest and project. And people don't have that. Most people are not quite there for that.
Right, and possibly don't even want that responsibility, actually.
Well, part of learning in the physical world, I think that's one of the things lacking, unfortunately, in our physical world is self-responsibility is not taught as much as it should be. Because when you enter into a thought-responsive environment, you better take responsibility for your thoughts, or you're going to end up in let's just say, a less than necessarily pleasant experience,
right.
Which happens in shamanism. It happens when people do ayahuasca.
Right.
If people are doing shamanic ceremonies, and you see these stories, they're slapping their legs, and
right.
your fears come up immediately.
Right.
But they're your manifestation. They're not an objective reality necessarily. You are creating. Your fears are taking shape. People don't understand that. And that's what I mean by taking responsibility. We are responsible for everything in our lives. And the thing is, when you leave your body or enter in altered states, the response to our thoughts happen 100-fold faster. Because we're no longer in the density of Earth that slows down this process. So we have to become adults.
Right.
And realize that we are the creative force. Very important if you want to ever become an effective explorer.
And so I find that that's very common as well. People are concerned about having, a fearful experience. And so this kind of gets back to the fear barrier again. What do you say to people who are maybe resistant to this because, they don't want to have an experience that makes them uncomfortable or is perhaps even frightening?
Well, I just did a newsletter in March that covers this entire topic. You have to be ready to take responsibility for your thoughts. Because once you realize that, it changes the game considerably. Let's face it, some people, if you've been totally indoctrinated from birth that there's devils and demons all around you and they're already going to pounce on you, you're probably not the ideal candidate to start exploring beyond your body.
Yeah.
And not because that there's an objective. I'm not saying that at all. Because you will create energy, let's say, that's reminiscent of your belief system. That's why I strongly recommend that people begin to work on themselves, to cleanse their own states of consciousness, to, let's just say, to reappraise everything you've learned. Because we grew up, all of us have grown up in a very fear-based society with fear-based belief. We all have. For 2,000 years, we've been indoctrinated with all these fears of fear of the unknown, fear of death, fear of entities, fear of abduction, it goes on and on and on. And that's part of many people's subconscious minds. So we have to begin to work on ourselves. That's why meditation plays a part.
Right.
That's why self-analysis plays a part. There's many aspects to the exploration of consciousness. It's not sexy, and that's why it's not talked about a lot. It's not exciting necessarily, so people glance over that and they want to get right to the meat.
Right.
Oh yeah, I want to leave my body and go exploring. And when they find their first experience, they find out, oh, that was not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
Because people confront their own fears generally very quickly, just exactly the same way they do when they enter into altered states through shamanic practices, through ayahuasca ceremonies. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Same process here as at work. You are the creative force. You better start to learn how to control it.
Right. So over your 40-some years of doing this, do you find that there are times in your life where it's easier to separate, and then maybe it'll move into times where it becomes more difficult? Are there certain life circumstances that seem to kind of trigger those periods?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When you're heavily involved in the physical world, like I'm in the middle of moving
Right. That's
right
great,
now.
Right? Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, I'm surrounded by boxes and a million things. You're totally, the more focused you are in a physical move. I noticed that when my sons got married, when you're focused in the physical heavily, generally speaking, I have found that limits my experiences. because we go where we focus. So it's all about how we focus our attention. And yes, if you're involved in a occupation or in a or life-changing, dramatic life changes generally seem to inhibit people's abilities. Let's face it, most of us are not trained monks.
Right.
We're not trained meditators. We're not trained in cleansing the mind and clearing the mind of every nuance of our physical life. It'd be nice if we were, but we're not. So yes, those type of things impact us. That's why I found it's best to have a nice calm, put yourself in a nice calm environment where you can focus on what's important, your own inner explorations.
And how has your exploration informed your view of, for lack of a better word, because these are loaded words, enlightenment or self-realization, self-actualization? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I do. I feel now those terms.
They're loaded.
They're very loaded terms.
Yeah.
That can mean many things to many people.
Yes.
But I think a big part of it is, what are we all seeking? Really, to know what we are. My feeling is the biggest question and the biggest issue facing humanity is that humans, the vast majority of humans, have no idea what they are, where they come. Think about it.
Yeah.
Humans don't know where they come from before they were born. They don't know where they're going at death.
Yeah.
They've been trained, I'm going to go to heaven. What the heck is heaven?
Yeah.
What is that? Where is it? What happens there? What's the purpose of even it being there? There's so many questions. Humanity as a whole is clueless. They're born, they identify, they do the best they can in their bodies. So enlightenment to me is about obtaining the answers for yourself. What am I? What am I beyond this temporary biological body that I'm shedding? What am I? What's my purpose? What was the reason for me to even be born here and go through this many people consider it like the meat grinder of the physical world, because it's challenging. It's a challenging school. That to me is what the process of enlightenment is obtaining the answers to what we are, so that and I don't mean believe, because beliefs just deter us in our exploration of the truth. We have to let go of the beliefs, all of them. I found that every belief that I was born with was all flawed or false, every single one.
Right.
So I had to start over, and it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to let go of everything, because you put yourself in a void. But that's what I found to be necessary. So then I'm open. I don't have all that, let's just say, misinterpretation. In a sense, we have to begin that way, to cleanse ourselves of the falsehoods before we can open up to the truth. And I think that's what enlightenment is becoming, knowing, having the experiences that will show us through personal experience what we are, where we're going, and what our purpose is.
Right. And so do you think there's kind of an ultimate endpoint that we arrive at? Or, are there layers to this? Is it constantly unfolding, just infinitely mysterious?
Definitely unfolding. Because we're multidimensional beings. I found it. The whole idea of out-of-body experiences is, people look at it as a very one-dimensional process, where the opposite is actually true. Out-of-body isn't unfolding. First, people experience often their etheric body, which is what I call the parallel world, then the astral, then the mental. So we're constantly unfolding into aspects of ourselves and beginning to see this broader, magnificent actual picture of what we are. Because we're incredible beings that have, in a sense, locked ourselves in this little shell for a very brief period of time for experiences, of course. Not that it's not important. I want to emphasize here that I don't consider OBEs to be escapism at all, because this comes up. It's not escapism, it's inner exploration. I know that what I'm doing in the physical world is important. I'm learning every day. I'm learning all the time. And so this is important. But it's also, I know that there's aspects this huge spectrum of me that I also want to explore. It doesn't diminish the importance of the physical. It actually makes the physical more important to me because I realize that I am a multidimensional being and I'm using this biological body to communicate with and to get across. Well, it's one of the reasons I wrote 4 books.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to communicate some of the stuff that I've learned from personal experience.
Right.
And I felt the burning need. The more experiences I had, the more I realized this information needs to get out there in a logical way that people can understand without all the mysticisms associated with it. There's a lot of terminology and the Eastern philosophies and all this language that is so difficult for the average person to understand.
Right.
That I wanted to cut through that. You don't need to learn Eastern mysticism to explore yourself. You just need your own method to go inward and explore and know for yourself. Because no culture, no one belief system has it all. Everyone has, throughout history, I've found, people have glimpses of things. And it's up to us to become effective explorers so that we can get the big picture and not depend on these limited snapshots that we get from past explorers of consciousness, no matter who it may be or how famous they may be.
So it seems like there's a certain sincerity of intention that you have to do this work. There's a desire that you have to want to have these experiences. And at the same time, it seems like I've come across some people that maybe want it a little bit too much. And so there's a certain balance that needs to be struck. Do you agree with that? And how do you kind of approach that with people that might be wanting it a little bit too much and kind of getting in their own way?
Yeah, I deal with that in my workshops. There's a lot of people that come to my 6-day OB intensive, and they're really intense.
Yeah,
very intense, which is fine. Except you need to learn how to relax and let go, and that's the part that people forget. They're so focused on. We live in a society that's technique driven, and unfortunately, it's more than that. You could learn and do the most effective techniques in the world, but if you haven't taken care of your self-identity and your fears, then you're going nowhere. Unfortunately, it's a multifaceted approach. That's what I try to get across as much as possible. You have to deal with your own state of consciousness. You have to deal with your fears. For instance, if you have fears in the physical world, they're a reflection of inner fears. If you're afraid of snakes or spiders or bees or the dark or being whatever it may be, that is a physical manifestation of an inner fear that needs to be addressed. You just can't slough that off. I believe that in the physical world we have to confront our fears and then resolve them here and now. Whatever it may be, fear of heights. People like, oh, well, that's not important. That won't matter. Yes, it does matter. Confront it. Go up in a hot air balloon. Go whatever it takes. If you're afraid, deal with your fears, because that is influencing not only your out-of-body experiences, but your entire explorations of consciousness will be impacted. So we have to remember it's a multifold approach. And yes, relax. People get so intense on their fixated goal that they block. And I talk about this extensively. One of the most difficult things I've found from being a teacher is that one of the most difficult things to do is to let go.
People have tremendous trouble with relaxation.
They
don't even realize that they're not relaxed. They think they're relaxed, but they're not actually relaxed.
As long as your mind is tense, you are not relaxed. That's why it's important to learn, for instance, self-hypnosis techniques can be. Everybody identifies and finds different methods effective. I heavily suggest meditation and self-hypnosis. Hemi-Sync can help that in that regard tremendously. That's why Hemi-Sync, I think, became so popular right out of the gate many, many decades ago.
Yeah.
Because it helped people. You put on your headphones,
Right.
and you just flow with the signals.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows people to get into those altered states in a nice, relaxed way.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, of course, I incorporated in both of my workshops.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thanks for joining us. Thanks for recording out-of-body techniques with us. I look forward to working together again in the future. It's a great conversation. Thanks very much.
Oh, well, thank you.